Thank you, Toby. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here today with you guys. I must say, had we had a conference like this 5 years ago, it would probably be a room of about 5 people. And in fact, I was at a bit of a talk with a farmer about 5 years ago, and we were talking about AI. And he was saying, yes, got that already, been doing it for years. And I was like, hang on a second, you've got AI? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. I said, what is AI to you? And he said, well, that's artificial insemination. I was like, slightly different to what we were talking about. So I'm glad to see today that a lot of people, AI, machine learning, the Internet of Things, these terminologies are becoming a accepted way of life or terms that we use every day. Agriculture 4.0, there's a lot of information around in the agricultural sector. Although I think one of our colleagues earlier said that agriculture is a little bit further behind than a lot of other industries. And the use of data in those industries has been prolific for the last couple of years, and agriculture is slowly catching up. And again, if I look around today, I'd say probably catching up a lot quicker. So there's learnings we can take from those. The one thing I would say as well is that when we talk about agriculture from a Proagrica perspective, we don't talk just about the farmer. We talk about the entire agricultural value chain. So from manufacturers to distributors, cooperatives, all the way down to the agronomists, the farmer, and then all the way up the other side of the supply chain, or to the food producers, and up to the end consumer and retailers who are wanting more and more information about where their food is grown, how it's grown, etc., etc. So putting all of that data together to make sense of it is a challenge that the industry is facing on a daily basis. And you can see that there's plenty of data. And when we look at it from our perspective, we look at it as 2 sets of data. We look at supply chain or value chain data, and you can see some of the comments from some leading companies around the world around where we are in terms of that adoption process in agriculture. 22% of the supply chain is automated and integrated. There needs to be more of that in order to realize a real upsurge in the agricultural industry. So not just focused on the agricultural farmer or the grower, but also looking at beyond that as well from that perspective. And we also, when we talk about agriculture, we sometimes ignore the fact that animal produce is also a part of the agricultural supply chain. So we work in those areas across the broader agricultural perspective, gathering data from various different entities and making insights on that data. So I'll take you through a little bit more. I mean, this was quite interesting slide. Some of the numbers that were quoted earlier today, we're talking about 20.5 billion connected devices in use by 2020. And guess what? We're in 2020 already. I think probably 1 billion of those are owned by my teenage daughters. So, and then precision agriculture, it's been around for years in various different guises from that perspective, but it's predicted to grow in terms of value from 5.1 billion all the way up to almost 10 billion in the next 3 years. And that generates a lot of interest around companies that haven't typically been part of the agricultural chain in the past, and a lot of innovation can come out of that from that side of things. It does create a lot of, when we talk about the agricultural data sets and we talk about, well, we should be doing what they do in the automotive industry, we also need to keep in mind that the agricultural industry is very complex in terms of the processes that we have and the relationships. And those are going through a continuous change every day. We see in the news changes in who's owned by who. Bayer and Monsanto are now one big company from their side of things. Syngenta owned by Chinachem, Adama as well. There's various different relationships between those companies in terms of how they share and move their data around and how they interact with their customers from their side of things. Take into account as well that the complexity around agriculture is not just based around getting the right part to the right time to the right place at the right time. You have weather, soil, climate, legislation, a whole lot of other factors, and it makes for a very difficult industry to operate in, especially when you're starting to look at data. And again, the data, not just what's happening in a supply chain, but what is happening on a farm and a field, and how much data is generated from that perspective. You've got cows that are generating data, your pets are generating data, so there's a lot of data to be taken into account, and how do you then use that data for the best benefits? It is a competitive market pressures globally as well as locally, the changing climate as well as changing legislation, and how people are operating. Farmers are also wanting more instant access to information and the ability to have an Amazon-like experience when ordering goods, for example. And then with all of this data flowing around, which is millions and millions and billions of bytes of data, it's how do you drive value from that data? So how do you actually take it, and where do you start from that perspective? So some of the key questions that we see when we engage with our customers around what they're seeing in the agricultural market related to this is how to maximize value creation. So there's data everywhere. What do you do with it, and how do you get it, and then how do you make use of that data so it has an impact on your business going forward? How do you minimize costs? We talked about 22% of the supply chain being automated. There's a load of costs that can still be taken out of that supply chain in order to drive down costs, not only for the benefit of the manufacturers and the distributors, but also for the customers or the farmers and the end customers and the retailers. And how do you take those costs out? By streamlining the processes, and then also future-proofing some of the business, which is an interesting challenge, because with everything creating data, how are you going to make sure that the new technology tomorrow can integrate with your big data platform or your analytics program that you're wanting to work with? And then, again, what do you do with that data? So is it I want to stop cattle theft? Is it I want to have a better yield from my side of things? Is it traceability around where the crops were grown and where they're sustainably grown, et cetera, et cetera? So there's loads of different areas within the agri value chain where big data or data can play a part, and some of it is available today, some of it is still getting sorted out, but a challenge that we're already facing and seeing on a daily basis. So just a little bit about the Proagrica business from our side of things. As I said, we kind of take a holistic view of the agricultural value chain. So we don't just focus on the farmer, although we are very focused there, but we also have solutions all the way through from manufacturer to retailer. And some of the observations that we see that when dealing with the big corporates like Syngenta or Bayer or BASF, etc., is that they are becoming more and more ingrained in the agricultural process than they had been in the past. So, for example, retail wants to know what was applied to a crop. That used to be the farmer's responsibility to provide that information, and our ag chem companies are trying to help the farmer to be able to realize that information so that we can export to European markets without having fear of the crops being held up in port because we don't have the right information. Processors are wanting to know how much grain they're going to have to mill wheat. They want grain grown in a specific way so that bread lasts longer on the shelves. So there's loads of different areas in the agri sector that require data to move to a smarter way of doing business. And that's kind of where we play from our side of things. So you've seen Microsoft, you've seen John Deere, and Proagrica is probably a name that you're not too familiar with. But in a nutshell, we're a global independent company that looks at connecting and analyzing data from a pure agricultural perspective. And we're based, as I said, around the world. So just, when we look at the situation and work with our customers today, this is what we see from our perspective. So there are systems out there. Agriculture, in a lot of cases, and a lot of industries, is still relatively manual. But in a lot of other places, there are systems down. We've seen John Deere controllers, we've got satellites, we've got drones, we've got farm management systems, we've got animal management systems, we've got vet practices, loads of different systems, but not all of them working together. So we have a challenge where there's disconnected systems in the industry, and in a lot of cases, in order to get the best view of what's going on, you need to gather all of that data up. Inefficient processes, you look at some of the supply chains that we run, they're not inefficient, but in some cases they're very tight. The grain haulage, you've got to be there at the right time at the right place, and if you're not, you might miss it, or the grain will be sitting in the farmer's field for longer than what's necessary. Customer engagement, that's you guys probably all use Take-A-Lot or Amazon to shop, and you experience that way of shopping a little bit differently. And as I've said earlier, a lot of farmers are wanting that kind of interaction with their suppliers and their providers of goods and services. Data is isolated, so you've got data everywhere. You've got in the cloud, you've got on-prem, you've got on controllers, you've got memory sticks, Excel spreadsheets. John Deere guys were showing about guys having notepads of data, et cetera, and it is, it's a complex operation running a farm. It's not something that you can, in some cases, plan down to the minute for. You have to have a relatively agile process or way of going about things. A great example is, I think it was last year in the US with torrential rains and snow, one of the farmers out there, he had a week to get his grain or his seed into the field before it started raining again. So you're operating in a relatively complex environment with relatively tight time frames. And then again, what is the value of the data? So we've had customers from our side of things that have got great data lakes of data from all sorts of systems, etc. And in some cases, we've had to go back to the beginning with them saying, right, well, you've got all this data, but sometimes you've got a data lake that looks like Lake Geneva, nice and pure and great mountains in the background. And then you've got a data lake which is full of crocodiles, piranhas, and other things that are going to cause you more trouble than if you try and utilize that data. So how you utilize that data and what you're using it for is also relatively important in terms of the agricultural value chain. So how can we address these challenges? So as I said, we look at it from our side of things from a supply chain or value chain perspective as well as from a farmer perspective. And then also we look at it internally within organizations. So big corporates or even big farms for that matter have loads of different systems within their organization. And again, data is difficult to move between those systems to make the right decisions. So we look at how we can optimize and move and make that information within an organization better, whether it's to understand that a sales rep or an agronomist has sold crop protection to a customer but never sold the seed to that customer, or whether or not the farmer has got the right time to harvest his crop, etc. And then down that chain, how does that translate to value for the farmers, the growers, and then ultimately the consumers from that perspective. So these are the areas that we focus on in terms of trying to understand and mitigate the data or use the data. I think a lot of the time is where we almost start by default is within an organization, because they're the owners of their own data in a lot of cases, and they can actually utilize that data a lot quicker. When you're starting to talk to growers, there's always the sensitivity around who actually owns that data and the data security associated with it. There's articles in the news every day about farmers not being too impressed with the way their data is being handled and looked after from their perspective. So if we look basically break it down and we look at some of the challenges inside an organization. So again, poor view of data, of business data. And I'm not saying this applies to everybody from their perspective. Some guys are further along this process than others, but in a lot of cases we see businesses still operating in different silos. Some of the customers that we work with have got 4 or 5 different ERP systems that they've accumulated through acquisition over the year, and 2 or 3 different CRM or customer management systems from their perspective. And that data is difficult to then kind of draw together. There's sometimes a slow and inaccurate communication of the data. So we've seen some of the edge cases that John Deere, Microsoft, and the rest are tackling quite successfully from their side of things. But even within an organization, from the loading dock to the silos, sometimes there's a disconnect in the data that happens there. Manual process. In Africa, we're very manually driven in a lot of the work that we do from our side of things. And even to say that it's not an African problem per se, it's in the US you have exactly the same. Guys been doing this for 100 years like this, and that's the way it worked. But to make use of that data more effectively, you have to get to a different way of doing things. And then again, like I said, some of the proactive decision making, if you have that data available in a very short season, you can make decisions about that season while it's still relevant, as opposed to generating a report at the end of the month and saying, oops, we missed delivering a whole lot of seed to a customer because we didn't know that they needed it, or it was locked away in a warehouse where nobody knew. So that's pretty key for some of the agricultural customers that we deal with. And then human error, which occurs in all sorts of industries from our side. So, as I said, these are some of the real challenges that we've seen and faced with some of our customers. Linking up their ERP systems, their CRMs, point of sale systems for guys that are running ag retail shops on their side of things, or stores, their legacy on-premises solutions that they might be using to run a mill or a silo storage operation, etc. Bringing that all together so that you can provide visibility of that business data while it's still relevant and it's fast and it's accurate. And then you can automate that process in order to reduce the errors and to get the best insights or value out of the data. If you look outside of the organization, when we look and speak with our customers, the challenges on both sides, so with their customers and with their suppliers, is in a lot of cases a disconnected supply chain. So when will my goods arrive? How much seed will I have to sell? How much of my ag chem has been told and ready to go and packed and ready to go to the customer? What customer is looking for it, in which regions, etc. So there's a slight disconnect on that. It's labor intensive in terms of how that information is shifted around, and manual and time consuming. So similar challenges to what you face within an organization are the challenges that you face outside of an organization as well. And then you break it down into some more simpler items, etc. Is, for example, do you have the right pricing for your customers? So when a customer buys at a specific price, is he buying at that price, or is he operating off of last year's price sheet, for example? I mean, it sounds pretty simple and something that should be right up front, but there's a lot of that going around where people are buying off last year's price list. So there's opportunities to make increases in profitability there. And then risk to customer satisfaction. So as I said to you, the demands or the requirements from customers nowadays has changed a lot. A lot of it driven by retail and also by consumers, but also some of it driven by the actual legislation that's going in. If you look in France, for example, the guys that are providing advice around agronomy services for crop protection are no longer by law allowed to actually sell the crop protection products from their perspective. So the French government is looking to stop the guys from pushing the product. They want the right product and less of the product on the food that's going into everybody's table. So those, when you look inside your organization, there's challenges. You look outside of the organization, there's other challenges, but there's also a lot of similar challenges across them from that side. So again, linking to external parties, how you do that and how you can make that easier. There's various different ways of doing it. We use a network from our side of things to bring everybody in, to clean data and to move data out again from that side. So again, if you're looking at the customers and the suppliers, there's loads of different people that are advising those customers. I mean, we even saw today, you've got drones flying overhead, you've got cooperatives, you've got trusted agronomists that are advising, you've got retailers that want something specific, distributors that are trying to sell. So there's loads of different products and or problems that people face, and it's about getting that data to the right place so that you can apply the right solution for the customers. Down to the grower level, again, as I said, if you look at how customers are engaging at the moment, they want to engage differently. So it's no longer about somebody coming and selling them a whole lot of ag chem or fertilizer. They want that expert advice that goes along with it, and they want the assurances that down the line, when they sell it to a retailer or a food processor, that they're not going to be in contravention of an act that says you put the wrong product on this, or you grew it too close to the Amazon rainforests, for example. So they're looking for that added value, which a lot of the manufacturers and a lot of the distributors, agronomists and equipment manufacturers are bringing to the table from their side. There's a lot of brand loyalty amongst customers. I think we own a farm management system in the UK, and there's a note around the office, not a note, but there's literally our subscription drops only when we lose a customer, is when that customer passes on, and that's when we lose customers. So there's a lot of brand loyalty to specific companies as well as to specific technologies. Communication of data, Microsoft spoke about it a little bit earlier, so did Vodacom. How do you get that data off of fields and into the hands of people that can use it or make it usable? And then the non-standard nature of data. So what it looks like for one farm management system or one combine harvester to what it looks like for another, in some cases is worlds apart, and in some cases they can't really work together, because you've got to interpret that data differently. I mean, if you define a field in the UK, it's slightly different to how you define a field in South Africa, although you would think it would be the same. In the UK, they've got X amount of meters per field that have to be set aside for green spaces, and they include that in their fields because they get incentivized by it, but it doesn't lead to what the yield production overall that field is from that perspective. So you've got to be able to standardize some of that data and make sense of it from that side. If you look at the growers, for example, there's, as I said, loads of information coming off of their fields, and how do you use that data to add value is a big question that a lot of people are struggling with, and some people are getting right and some people aren't. But there's loads of touch points of data that result in different areas for value to be created. You could do it in a number of different ways. So we found a lot of customers want to do I think initially when the Agri 4.0 revolution started, a lot of people rushed in thinking we'll be the industry player that maintains and controls all of this data, and we'll be the ones that provide value on top of it. I think over the last couple of years, we've seen that kind of settle down, and I think also a realization coming across from a lot of people is that that isn't going to be the answer, because you're not going to have one player dominating the entire ag industry when it comes to connecting up data. So the other option is to say, okay, well, we'll all just join up to each other so that we can speak to each other and send data between each other via APIs or some sort of a format that we agree on from that perspective, which when you start multiplying that by systems, number of messages, etc., it becomes a bit of a mess to maintain, monitor, and obviously roll out from that side of things. And then, when we're talking about the geospatial data side of things, we're talking about we use what we call AgX from our side of things, which is a geospatial central data repository, which contains a lot of the information around the field information that we need from our perspective. And again, people plug into it to be able to check their data. The interesting thing about this is the data remains the farmer's data, so it doesn't transfer ownership to anybody, but the farmer can permission that data to be seen and accessed by other industry players. So, for example, a fertilizer provider wants to provide a fertilizer requisition. The farmer can say, yes, share my data with that industry player, and they'll be allowed to then provide advice through that from that perspective. So it makes it a little bit easier to then share that data, but even that's not easy because of the complexity of the geospatial data that we deal with. So basically, if we put it all together, where we're looking, and as I said at the beginning, there's been a lot of talk around the data on the farm, and that's not to take away from what it is, but there is other areas of data across the agri value chain. So within the organization, with the customers and suppliers, so across the supply chain, and then ultimately to the benefit of the growers and ultimately out to the retailers and consumers, the you and me. And if you're able to pull all of that information together, the insights that you can generate from it are a lot more effective. And I'm not to say that everybody does this or can do this, but this is where everybody should be or is kind of moving towards from their side of things. I've kind of gone through some of this from my side of things, but there's other softer issues around why data is difficult to kind of access. So why is it such a challenge? Why isn't the fourth agricultural revolution feeding more of the world already with less waste and less food and less chems, etc., etc.? But there's conflicting interests, which sometimes people, as I said, don't want to share data because they see it as theirs, which in some cases it is, and they're suspicious around what people are going to do with the data. It's like you don't want to share your Wi-Fi password with everybody. It's a kind of a similar perspective from some of the farmers. And then many of the systems that are in use today, it's changing, absolutely changing from that side of things, but a lot of the systems that are in there that have been there for the last 20 or 30 years were never built with the mind of saying, oh, we need to be able to share data. It was built with, I want to run my farm as best as I can from my perspective, or my warehouse, or my manufacturing plant, etc., etc. So they weren't really built with that in mind. It is changing, and a lot more of that is going on. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be sitting having this conversation. So that's the encouraging signs, but there's still a lot of legacy systems that need to be dealt with that will probably be there for the next 10 years. And it is a complex process. I mean, if you think about just translating languages from English to Afrikaans or from Zulu to Sotho, whatever, there's loads of different nuances associated with data and how people view that data. So it is a complex. Then add in the complexities associated with the agricultural industry and geospatial data, and it's kind of it's a big job to get done from that perspective. So and a lot of the time there's industry bodies and a lot of people will work on creating standard models. But even that comes along and you still require enrichment of that data. And when I say enrichment, I mean bringing in other data sources to support the data that you have, be it weather data, historical grower data, soil data, etc. It has to come together from that perspective. And ag systems, I think you'll probably all see, all of you will agree from today, and you probably all know it, but they're becoming more and more geospatial. And in some cases, the data processing capabilities are immature. If you look at the field and how much data is generated off a field, you refer back to the John Deere video of a little bit earlier, there's tons of data coming off of that, and that data needs to be processed to provide value on the data. And it's challenging when you're dealing with geospatial data. There's just no two ways about it. It's not as easy as just supply chain data or anything to that effect. So how can the challenges be overcome? So it is very much around collecting data. If you don't have the data to start with, you're not going to get any of the insights to analyze because you need a starting point. And that is becoming, as I've said, there's challenges associated with it, but we see it becoming a little bit easier, and it is in the thought process of people that are putting machinery and equipment down now, and it has been for a while, so it's getting better. So the collection of data is becoming a little bit easier to manage. Then the standardization of data, you've got to bring it into a common format in order to move it through the process and come up with insights and results at the end of it. So you need to do a lot of work, and that's a lot of the hard work behind the scenes that nobody sees has to be done. Then the cleanup of the data, so you'll pull tons of data through, and some of that data you won't even be able to use because it just doesn't make any sense. We had a data set, I can't remember how many millions of kilobytes it was from our side of things, but there was one product in there, which was a Dexar, which had been spelt 150 different ways by a farmer. So farmers are not typists, we all know that, so it becomes difficult to you got to clean that data and make sure it's the right. And then again, enriching that data, as I said, pulling information from outside sources so that the data is more effective and is actually something that you can use. And then ultimately, the analysis of the data. So those are, when we talk about data challenges, those are some of the steps that need to be taken in order to overcome it. The good news is that it's not impossible. We do it a lot from our side of things. We've got the tools to do it, and we can either feed that into your analytics tools or use our analytics tools, doesn't really matter. It depends on what you want to do. A couple of as you guys go along your data journey in your environments, there's a couple of key considerations that you need to keep in mind, and data permissioning. I don't know if anybody's been following the news, but there's been a big bust up in the US around some of that currently at the moment, led to cancelled contracts, etc. So data permissioning and who owns that data at the end of the day is something that you have to bear in mind and keep top of mind when you're talking about the data. Data standardization, as I said, I don't think we'll ever get to a format where everybody agrees 100% on everything, but those things are coming into play, and you can work with them, but you still need to bring them into a standardized way of dealing with that data. And then data architecture. When you start a data process, don't start with the architecture at the end. You need to start with at the beginning. As I mentioned, some of our customers with massive big data lakes that are going to solve all of their problems haven't been architected properly, so they're back to the drawing board with loads of data, but not real much value in it. And data is an expertise business. It's not there was a cartoon that a guy sitting down telling his new employee, listen, it's part of our strategy, data, analytics, it's important, you need to do it, it's the whole business of the whole future of the company going forward, and congratulations on starting your 6-month internship. So it is a key expertise that needs to be treated as that. Then the data objectives and the data access, as I said, you need to know what your objectives are, and some of those will unfold as you go along this journey because you don't know all of it. There's a whole lot of things that we don't know, and we learn as we go along from that perspective. But these are just some of the areas that you need to keep in your mind as you go through a data journey in agriculture. It's pretty important. So I see I've got about 2 minutes left from our side of things, so I'm going to very quickly just go through, because you look at all of this data flowing through the agricultural chain, and you can go, ooh, where do I start? It's a little bit scary, I'm not quite sure, so let me just carry on with my day job. But you can do it now. There is value that can be extracted from the data that you have. So one of our South African companies, a load of legacy systems on their side of things, they were putting in new point-of-sale systems to get closer to the customer and understand them better. But they were in various locations and they had old systems, so they needed to pull that all together, plus new warehouse management systems, forecasting, and there was no visibility of that data between them. So we managed to, using some of our technology, pull all of that information together and provide them a view of exactly what was happening in the environments within their own organization so that they could have a better handle on what they were doing from their side. And then ultimately feed that into some sort of analytics tool again. Other one, one of Australia's largest co-ops, they were trying to make decisions on how they should sell and who they should sell to. Through a series of acquisitions, they ended up with 3 different farm management systems and agronomy systems from their side of things, and they weren't able to get any of the synergies between customers that they thought they'd be able to get from their side of things. So we managed to through a load of work, pull that information, clean it, and then pass it through so that they could start to see where they were requiring stock, what customers were buying seed, what customers were buying ag chem, and which customers they were missing out from their side of things. So again, a little bit of more of an external focus from that perspective, because it brought in information from farm management systems that they used but didn't own, and they needed to be able to get a picture of what was happening in their market. So we've got a number of different examples on our side of things, and in this case, this is more towards the farm, for example, where the crop manufacturer or the crop protection manufacturer was looking to understand some of the challenges that their customers were facing in terms of disease and getting ahead and trying to predict that. So we again provided some of the technology, again, not all of it, so we pulled information from other sources as well in order to allow them to get a better understanding of what was going on in the season and provided better advice for their customers on their side of things through their advisors. So so just in conclusion, growth of data in agriculture isn't going to slow down. It's going to speed up. You've seen all of that today. There's going to be more of it than ever. There are challenges, but there are certainly opportunities to do things in the short to the near term with an eye to the future as well. And there is a way forward. I mean, sometimes when you look at this, you go, ooh, too much data. What am I going to do? And we do nothing. But ultimately, there is a way forward from that perspective. So thank you very much. Appreciate your attention. And if you need to grab me during the break, I'll be running around. So thank you.